Des Talks, our podcast exploring creativity across Scotland. I'm Susanna Beaumont, and I look forward to sharing with you inspiring conversations with some of our most adventurous, curious and brilliant designers, artists, makers and curators. We talk ideas and inspiration, challenges and influences, the contemporary and the historic. I'm delighted today to be introducing a conversation that was held at the Hawthornden Lectures Theatre, National Galleries of Scotland, celebrating the Edinburgh-born geologist, farmer and radical thinker, James Hutton, who was born 300 years ago this year in 1726. For this conversation, we're joined by Dr Katie Strang, curator of rocks and minerals at the Hunterian in Glasgow, and maker-designer Stefanie Ying Lin Cheong, a Glasgow-based artist who has made a new work, a celebration of soil for Earth Matters, the exhibition that is currently on at Royal Botanic Gardens, Edinburgh. Thanks to the National Galleries for allowing us to share this conversation with you.
Hello and welcome to the National Galleries of Scotland. My name is Gráinne Rice and I work in the learning team here at the Galleries. And a very special welcome to our audience joining us online today as well. I'm delighted to be introducing today's event, Earth Matters, a panel discussion with designer-maker Stefanie Ying Lin Cheong, Dr Katie Strang from the Hunterian in Glasgow, and Susanna Beaumont, the curator of Earth Matters, the exhibition that's on at the Royal Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh here until the 1st of November. Earth Matters, the exhibition, marks 300 years since the birth of James Hutton, the Edinburgh-born geologist, farmer and thinker who revolutionised our understanding of Earth's creation and the ground beneath us. Often described as, quote, the father of modern geology for his studies of rock formation, he also focused a lot of his attention on soil. Hutton is a sitter in several portraits in the National Galleries collection, which obviously belongs to all of us, and not least the absolutely fabulous brassy hole murals, which are in the Great Hall at the Portrait Gallery. Earth Matters exhibition is inspired by Hutton and subsequent trailblazers who have helped challenge and change our understanding of our world. With works of more than 30 modern and contemporary artists and makers, the exhibition explores Hutton's writings on soil and includes a very rarely exhibited 18th century lost drawings by his contemporary, the artist and writer John Clarke of Eldon, who also features in the National Galleries collections. So more about the exhibition as the talk unfolds, and I'll say a few words about Susanna Beaumont, who will be chairing today's conversation. So Susanna Beaumont is a curator and creative producer. Her current projects include Ash Rise, a touring exhibition of the Scottish Furniture Makers Association, which is celebrating the ash tree, along with Earth Matters at the Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh. She is the founder of the Design Exhibition Scotland and was guest curator for Craft Scotland at Collect in London in 2024. She also curated Design for Our Times at the V&A in Dundee in 2023. And she recently launched a podcast, Des Talks, D-E-S Talks, S-Talks, celebrating creative ideas, artists and designers from across Scotland. I'm going to say it's brilliant because I'm one of the featured speakers. A little bit biased. Anyway, please join me in welcoming today's panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gráinne, and welcome everybody. And thank you, Stefanie and Katie. Here we go. So just a little, what we're going to do is talk a little bit about Hutton with comments from Katie, who, as we said, is at the Hunterian and is curator of rocks of minerals. And then Stefanie, who responded to an open call for Earth Matters and has done a new piece. So here's James Hutton, and this is a portrait in the Portrait Gallery. And it's on show at the moment. And I, when I look at Rayburn, often see wigs, pink cheeks, wonderful outfits for both ladies and gents. But here is Hutton, not wearing a wig, actually quite bronzed, quite tanned. He's not pale, wearing a suit. And this is a suit of worsted wool of the farmer. So here he is looking very much a man of the land. And when you do compare it with other Raeburn portraits, you realise how very different it is, that he's quite... and then on the table, you can see his collection, a small collection of kind of rocks and minerals. And what is crucial about Hutton was that he was a farmer. He was born in Edinburgh 300 years ago this year on the 3rd of June in, I'm not quite sure exactly where, but in Edinburgh, and he kind of ended his life in Edinburgh. But he did have the farming years. And this is Sly Houses near to Dun, so in Berwickshire, kind of hopping several skips from Sicker Point, which he is famous for, looking at rock formations. And you can find this old plaque that talks about Hutton, the kind of pioneer farmer. And it was by looking at soil, erosion, and tending to his crops that he kind of realised that there was a cyclical part of kind of the how Earth had evolved was through a deeper time. Maybe, Katie, you can just say, as we're here, exactly what Hutton did. We're going to come on to more of your rocks in a minute, but I'm just going to go back and what we've talked about, what is sitting on his table. What do you think it is there?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of discussion among geology curators about Hutton's collection and where it actually ended up, because we don't actually know what happened to it. But from what is on the table, there's a really beautiful septarian nodule there. And I know in the Hunterian, we have a half that looks very similar. And in the National Museum of Scotland, the curator, Dr Rachel Walcott, has also found a very similar one. So it's something that we're constantly thinking about and sort of trying to identify, but it's very hard to sort of predate or go back to that documentation. But did you want me to mention a bit about the sort of deep time of Sicker Point?
Maybe just as we're starting, what Hutton is so key is the father of modern geology.
Yeah, so Sicker Point, for MD who's been, it's on the Berwickshire coast, and he visited that by boat to look at that section. And what you have is the underlying rocks, which have all been tilted and they're almost vertical. And he realised that on top of that, you have younger rocks, which were almost horizontal. And looking at that, he realised that, those processes, there had to be missing time in between, tens or hundreds of millions of years. And it was by looking at that section and other sections like at Jedburgh and at Holyrood that he was able to start realising that, that kind of long-held belief about the Earth being 6,000 years old wasn't actually possible when you actually identify these processes and think about how long those rocks would have taken to be deposited.
Perfect. Thank you. So we'll just kind of go through these. So there, and you can go and visit this farm, it's a kind of public walkway, so you can go and explore the old marl pit. And this, again, we've got this in the exhibition. This is an etching by John Kay, and probably of what is now known as Hutton's section on Salisbury Crags. But I've always loved this. If you look at the profile, he's literally chipping away. He's got a little hammer, chipping away at the profiles of the kind of old guard, I always like to think. And probably the house in the background is where he once lived. It's no longer there, but there is the Hutton Memorial Garden. And here is a bit blurred, but this is what Gráinne was mentioning, the frieze at the National Portrait Gallery. And here you can see him kind of somewhat sandwiched between Burns and Telford. And again, there's lots that they probably did meet, Burns and Hutton, and there's a whole exploration, and particularly Karen Polwarth, the singer, has discussed the probable meeting, and when Burns talks about the seas gang dry, in My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose, this is probably referencing Hutton. And here is the theory of the Earth. Maybe, Katie, you can say how kind of key, it was a very dense book. It was somewhat difficult to read. Even his friends like John Playfair said this is a little dense, but this is a key text by Hutton.
Yeah, and it really revolutionised our understanding of, deep time and what geology was and its kind of beginnings as a science. So, by actually looking at the rocks and studying them from hand specimen level to also outcrop level, his theories were basically, or are still what we use today in geology. And he had colleagues who later rewrote his work because of how dense it was, and they didn't think it was particularly accessible, so they tried to rewrite it in a more accessible way so that more people could actually get to learn about that and understand Hutton's theories.
And that's why I always think it's so key, and I suppose that was the impetus behind Earth Matters, is how artists, writers, craftspeople, designers can help welcome us into kind of ideas that are a little dense, a little kind of difficult to navigate. And I think, imagine today when I've been kind of looking and learning about Hutton and words from geology and rock formations, that I can find a little overwhelming. So think what it was like 300 years ago, where we very much believed that the Earth, or the kind of Western Christian idea that the Earth had been created in 6,000 years. So Hutton to come out with these really radical, said, hold on a minute, this is ancient, and by looking at rock formation. So again, I think if we go to Clark of Eldin, so Clark of Eldin was a contemporary of Hutton's. They studied medicine at the University of Edinburgh together, and Hutton and Eldin travelled together. They travelled to Jedburgh, they travelled to Arran, they travelled up to Glen Tilt up in Perthshire, and how this kind of artist helps us and think, I get it. And I particularly get this because this is Missy, probably Hutton's dog. And here you can see them literally measuring. And Clark of Eldin, I think, helps kind of welcome us in, kind of provokes our curiosity, but also that same sense of awe and wonder that they probably had 300 years ago is still very much with us today. And what we're so lucky, we've loaned this, they're called the Lost Drawings because they were at Pennycook House near Pennycook and are still in the ownership of Sir Robert Clark of Pennycook. And they were lost. And I think they were just put in a cupboard and then were refound in 1968. So we're incredibly lucky we've borrowed them for the exhibition. But this is Castle Street. And these really amazing drawings. And again, that sense of curiosity and wonder, but just beautiful, beautiful drawings and ink. And this is a very famous one of Jedburgh. Again, maybe, Katie, as we're looking at this, and again, he takes in the human. You think, I get it, the human scale, because you can see the horse and carriage here. Maybe, Katie, you can say how kind of key this is as a work. Yeah,
so it's a very iconic drawing that I think probably pretty much every geologist has probably looked at some point. But what I love about it is also very familiar to non-geologists. And I think that the way it's done, it really depicts that section. You can see that unconformity, so that that missing geological time, which was so key to him sort of developing his theory of the Earth. And yet having those human elements, I find really interesting, because as a geologist, I would normally have those there as a scale so that you can get a sense of scale of your section or the rock outcrop that's there. But I know that there has been discussion about the use of those, and what they can portray and how that can kind of connect the humans to that sort of non-human element of the landscape as well.
No, I think, and actually you can't, when you go to Jedburgh, it's now pretty much covered with kind of ivy, so it's very, very difficult to see. But again, this sense of taking Hutton's kind of the complexities of an idea and welcoming us in, I think is tremendous. And as I say, that was very much the kind of starting point to Earth Matters, which is, if you haven't seen it, this is the first room at Inverleith House. And these hangings by Louise Bennett, she again came through the open call and very much responded to Clark of Eldin's drawings. And we went to look at them down near Pennycook. And very much inspired. So as you kind of walk through that sense of kind of walking through time and layers, and then on the right, we've got a work called James Hutton's Parent Material by Lana Halperin. She's just had the exhibition at the Fruit Market. And she got soil, or she got it via the James Hutton Institute, and she used the Hutton or soil from Sly Houses, his farm in the Borders, to make a pigment. And then next to that, you've got Graham Todd, who was an artist that was based in Dunbar and often pasted kind of coastal scenes. So we're kind of, and what's amazing, this colour of wall, each room at the Botanics has a colour, and it's inspired by 50 shades of soil, Scotland soils, which from the James Hutton Institute up in Aberdeen. And this work here at the back, I think we've got, there you got more. So this kind of wonderful, you walk through and the light is tremendous, as you probably, most of you know, looking south from Inverleith House. But also this is an 18th century, was once a private dwelling. And I liked, it's the same age as Hutton. And here you can see we've got this vitrine where we've got the Clerk of Eldin drawings. There's the etching on loan from the City Arts Centre. And this work here by George Perry is called Huttonware, which is kind of imagining what Hutton might have drank from when he was down on his farm in Sly Houses. So here we are, Katie. This is your land, your territory. Yeah.
So this image here is from the Berwickshire coastal path between Bournemouth and Eyemouth, so on the east coast. And it's very close to where I grew up. So I grew up in Bournemouth and I went to school in Eyemouth. And that entire time growing up there, I had no idea who James Hutton was. I'd never heard of him. I don't think there was really any interpretation or anything around. And it wasn't until I actually went to uni and studied geology that I found out who James Hutton was. And I was like, wait, like that's literally where I grew up. And these rocks were very much my playground. There's not really much in that area of the borders. So you did just go out and crawl around rocks, which is still what I do today. But now going back there, actually having the knowledge and, having studied geology, it's really interesting because it does bring that totally different connection when you're sitting there thinking about these processes. And, these rocks once formed the deep bottom of the Iapetus Ocean, the ocean which separated Laurentia, which Scotland was part of, and Avalonia, which England was joined to. And when those continents collided, they basically scraped up all of those rocks and deformed them. And there's folds that have been folded and upturned, and they are incredibly messy. But, when you're looking at them, you really do get a sense of the sheer scale of those geological events and, the sort of power behind those processes.
And did you wonder at the time that, because they are extraordinary, this kind of the verticals and then you can get the horizontals. I'll just go on to the next one. Yeah. Were you kind of curious from the start, just like Hutton?
Yeah. So I remember as kids, that we would just spend all of our time sort of crawling about and, we'd get paid to pick whelks and stuff. So you were going out crawling around. And one thing that I would always remember is, and I still have like scars on my leg from like falling over, cutting your legs, because those are very sharp, jaggy rocks. And, when it's wet or there's like seaweed and stuff. But I think that, I was always so curious, but I didn't know what it was I was curious about because, coming from sort of a council estate, I just didn't have any way or any access to that information or anybody to sort of teach me about it. So it very much was that kind of curiosity, but purely based on my own experiences. And now, I do still spend a lot of time there as an adult crawling about. So,
and when did you first kind of encounter Hutton? And was that when you were studying geology at Glasgow?
Yeah, so I might have heard of him when I was younger, but just, it probably didn't stick, I think. I didn't have that kind of interest. I didn't even know what geology was until after I had gone to university. So it was a bit of a roundabout way. And it's when I actually started studying geology and realised how much I loved it, it totally brought me back to that, kind of childhood of just exploring those areas and thinking about these shapes and formations and textures, but now actually being able to think about it in a way that made sense. And this is probably my favourite bit of beach, which this is in Bournemouth, which is where my mum still lives. And the rocks that you can see in the foreground are a lot younger. So these are early Carboniferous, and these are from the very beginning of the Carboniferous period. And you're looking out to those cliffs in the background, which are those Silurian greywackies, which are the same rocks.
Which is a brilliant name,
yes,
greywackie. I mean, again, when I was perplexed, I couldn't believe there is a stone called greywacke. What is greywacke exactly?
So greywackies are basically very metamorphosed sort of sedimentary rocks, the ones that have undergone, sort of tectonic alteration and been under pressure or buried at depths, and they become very, very hard. So they can be a very good rock, and they have been exploited for building stones and things at various points. But I think the thing that I love sort of most about this image is that you're standing on rocks that the evidence from those rocks is from the very first evidence of animals moving from the sea onto land, so very early tetrapods. But then you're looking out over to those ancient Iapetus sediments, and you just really have this sense of deep time and just the hundreds of millions of years that have passed. And it is amazing to be able to go back now, as I say, with that knowledge and that different appreciation of
and maybe
geology.
We should say that deep time was a term that Hutton didn't use, but John McPhee, the American, maybe just say a little bit about deep time, because it's something that we use a lot these days. This is a turn of phrase.
So deep time is something that I forget as a geologist, because I'm thinking constantly in those timescales, and you're trying to understand things that happened over tens or hundreds of millions of years. But that sort of deep time can be a very abstract thing for a lot of people to try and comprehend. So I guess because you had that early thinking of, the Earth being sort of created or being only 6,000 years old, and then once they sort of unraveled that theory and started to understand the processes, and we still do today look at modern processes occurring to try and understand those in the past. And I think deep time is it's something you do hear bandied about quite a lot, and I guess it sounds really good and it is quite thought-provoking as well. But really to a geologist, deep time is just thinking about the actual geological processes, so not the kind of modern stuff that's going on now or the more recent things like the Ice Age and stuff.
Thank you. And this has inspired your hair? Or
yeah,
we were talking about this earlier.
I do like to dye my hair to match different rocks, and there's a lot of really cool rocks, so a lot of hair dyeing. But so these are two of the samples that were actually collected by Hutton's colleagues Playfair and Webb Seymour, and that was part of their rewriting of the theory of the Earth. So they went to Glen Tilt to have a look at the rocks there. And this was when Hutton was trying to develop his theory of Platonism and about how rocks would have formed from molten magma, basically, because sort of other theories were that rocks formed from water, including granites and things. But Glen Tilt is quite a famous locality where you can see these veins of granite cross-cutting the darker rock, and using laws of superposition and the fact that they're cross-cutting, those relationships were what Hutton had used to sort of illustrate his theory. And then, Playfair went out and collected more material just so that he could then re-illustrate it in an easier to understand way. And we have a lot of that collection in the Hunterian from that sort of.
And I actually should say at Blair Castle at the moment, there's an exhibition by Jake Harvey and Helen Douglas where they've done a lot of work around Glen Tilt. So that opened a couple of weeks ago, but it's on over the summer. So if you're doing and I've walked along Glen Tilt trying to look, and I think I did find, but again, these folds of rock, and it was a key where he went with Clark of Eldin to kind of, as you say, kind of gather visual evidence and stones but again, and this is I don't know where Hutton drew this, but again, Clark of Eldin, but again, this kind of pinky. So what rock would you call this, or stone? How would you identify?
So you've got the granite veins that are cross-cutting at kind of samite, so it's metamorphic. The dark rock is the metamorphic one. You've got these granite veins, which would have been intruded from a kind of molten magma chamber. And I love this. So at the time when Hutton was kind of using hand samples and things, a lot of people were quite against that because there was, a lot of connection to like Christianity and religion, and people didn't really like that people were looking for things that they could prove through experimentation or through, like actually having something that that kind of showed the processes. So there was a lot of people who weren't particularly happy about the way he did that. But
was that seen as quite revolutionary and unusual to literally get specimens from the ground, from the...
Yeah, I would say so, particularly for that time. And, a lot of people that would have been collecting specimens then would have been more for that kind of cabinet of curiosities and look how many pretty samples I have, whereas Hutton was actually actively, trying to understand through like small hand specimens and those larger scale outcrops as well.
And I suppose it is. I mean, he was probably in his 30s, 40s at this point. So it's 240 or 60 years ago. So that's pre that whole you tend to think of a very Victorian, that kind of gentleman kind of figures who were kind of gathering and collecting. So this is kind of still mid 18th century. And there again, I love this with your hand.
Yeah.
So where are you here? Where have you been?
So this is just down at a bit called Agate Point, which is just a bit on the Berkshire coast near Eyemouth, where the golf course is. So if anybody's visited, there is no agates at Agate Point, but there is lots of very beautiful calcite veins, and these pale pink veins just look really striking against the kind of dark rock. But you can find so many pebbles that tell so many different stories about the sort of crustal extension, things getting pulled apart, and material being redeposited in the cracks and things. So I just love the absolute variety that you get.
And the beauties. And what sort of date, just to give us, how much deep time is there in those?
So these are sort of over 400 million years old.
I mean, it's just... Yeah. And here's Stefanie.
Yeah, I need to go on a walk with you.
I know, I think we all need to go on a walk.
See it through your eyes and really kind of understand the geology and the reasoning for it, because I think that's what I miss within my work. But yeah, so I'm an artist jeweller, and I studied at Glasgow School of Art. But the more my work's developed over the last 10 plus years, I've realised that I'm more interested in the materiality of things and how we can sort of research those materials to tell wider stories. Should I use this to
Yeah. But where are you here? Because I've always loved, this is one of my favourite photographs of Stefanie.
This is such a pivotal photograph, actually. So this is me in a river in Tyndrum, and I'm panning for gold. And this is the exact point where my focus shifted from metal into stone. And it's really because, I mean, from a jeweller's perspective, the jewellery industry can be quite problematic in terms of how, I guess, extraction from the environment, but also the human kind of impacts it can have as well. They're quite sort of negative. And so what I wanted to do was to find my own materials for my final year collection. And so this is me spending hours and hours and hours in a river only to find a few flecks of gold, and thought, right, that's not going to cut it for a whole collection. So I was like, what else can I use? And then, looked at rocks. And, all of my life growing up, you would pick up stones, but I didn't have this deep interest like Katie did. But I was like, right, I'm going to be resilient and I'm going to work with what I have, but through that can sort of story tell as well. So, so this was me in, I think, 2012, I think. And so the first collections that I made were mainly rocks that I collected. So these are a mixture of all Scottish rocks, because at that point I realised that I could storytell through place. And I was super amateur geology and from knowledge that I had, but at that point sort of got really stuck into researching the geology of Scotland, and then figured out that Scotland was so important historically for James Hutton and finding, these ideas of deep time. And so that sort of really piqued my interest, and thought there's more to this than I originally thought. And then I also were kind of looking historically at Victorian jewellery. Scottish pebble jewellery was really, I guess, quite a large thing. In Edinburgh, they had lapidarists. So I was learning the art of lapidary, which is stone cutting. So kind of self-taught, because they don't teach you those different, and they don't have the equipment at the art school. So it was all kind of self-guided, just because I was trying to be ethical. So I knew where my materials came from, because as I would collect the data of where I collected the stones. But as my sort of interest sort of grew, and the more sort of niche it got, I started thinking, well, how ethical is it for me just to go to a beach and collect a stone, or to go and collect one from like a forest walk? I'm removing that's extractive. What could I do instead? And so I started researching different ways of kind of creating my own stones. This slide here represents like a research project I was doing. It was an intensive residency actually at Cove Park back in 2020, just before lockdown. So that's when my practice sort of shifted from using just found rocks to sort of thinking about, I guess, sort of how I could like advocate for the environment as well. So not just sort of thinking about like, well, I know that the jewellery industry and this is like quite negative, but maybe I can offer an alternative, but actually how can I push that further? And so I worked with, it was a tie maker we were paired, it was part of a British Council project where through Applied Arts Scotland, where we were to sort of look at collaboration, identity and sustainability. And so we sort of met at this middle ground where we were interested in thinking about e-waste and how e-waste is often shipped to different countries. And through that, looking at the lens of my interest in geology. So we borrowed sort of rock cycles that, again, you know, Hutton kind of explored. And so we tried to sort of make processes to create our own rocks from it, to think about what our future fossils might look like.
And again, I always think, again, we talk about deep time, but I think about future time. And in a way, this is, you know, just to kind of mirror that. And I think that's what your work very much does. It's looking at what is going to be the future materials, which is plastic conglomerates, e-waste, yes.
So it's like all the waste that we are producing and leaving. And again, it's, I think, that interest in materiality that sparked that those ideas. So, and also I hadn't come across the term plastic conglomerate till this point, and discovered that there was these rocks found in Hawaii that were amalgamations of bits of like plastic waste with rocks and sand and sort of kind of melded together. And actually, I don't know if anyone's seen any samples of these, but they're actually quite beautiful looking. But when you unravel like why they're there, what's happened, you know, the stories are quite dark. So I just thought maybe through my work I could then talk a bit about that. And that sort of led on to this project, which was actually with Susanna. It was a design exhibition call out for making some benches for Mount Stewart. I don't know if you want to talk more about that project.
But it's on the Isle of Bute, and there was a call out that I worked with Mount Stewart on benches, and I've always been very fond of a bench because it's hospitable and welcoming, and you can sit down and eat a sandwich or take in a view. And you were working with Andy. Yeah. Just forgotten his surname. So you have as well. Dress for the Weather.
Dress for the Weather.
Yeah, it's the name of the architectural firm that he was. But yeah,
talk about watching.
But this again was an exploration of time and materials, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Andy Campbell.
There we go.
Andy
so Campbell.
He's a really interesting architect.
Dress for the Weather is his
interested in materiality as well. And so our collaboration, we sort of proposed this idea of these benches that would sort of act as a way of contemplating time. So the base is salvaged sandstone from an old church that was on Bute that we found kind of at the back of the quarry, and we were like, can we have that? So we had big trucks move it to Mount Stewart where we tooled it, and then the seat part is actually post-consumer plastic waste. So that sort of shows like just a sort of slight, I guess, coverage on top of the bench. It's practical because it's dry and not cold. But we wanted to sort of show that this 40 million year old sandstone with this kind of like layer of plastic on the top. So we wanted to kind of discuss like deep time, but also anthropogenic ideas of kind of human waste and impact on the planet. So that's where we've worked together in the past. And then this led on to some research, which was actually my maternity project for my second child. Just a bit of headspace to deep delve into sort of other ways I can talk about the way humans have changed rock over time. So this was I wasn't saying it was fully comprehensive because there's lots of other rocks that could be added, but it was where I got to with my research before I presented it as part of a showcase in London for Collect with Craft Scotland that Susanna also, I mean, it's not nepotism, but it just so happened that you were curating that project as well. And so, yeah, it's a suite of jewellery. The central part is a brooch. I think you can see it here. And then the rocks around it, there's 14 different types, and they range from Stone Age flint, again, right through. There's some of the plastic glomerate there as well that you can see, concrete, early ceramics, early glass, right through to sort of thinking about the way we've been quite extractive. So the way humans have like manipulated, changed, innovated, but also exploited. So it's more of a brooch that you could wear that would be like a conversation piece, really, so that you could then.
But didn't you go up the one of the bings, the bings at in Midlothian?
Yeah, so the kind of the one under the
baby
green.
in papoose, I think.
Yes, exactly. I ripped my jacket and everything. It was like all for the cause. So this, the spent shale, actually. So the shale is a rock that I wanted to be part of the collection because in the 1950s in the Lothians, they were very rich in shale. I don't know if you know any of the geology of that area, but then it was dug up quite quickly over a number of years. So it didn't take that long, but what they were doing was they were heating it in kilns and extracting out the shale oil. That shale oil was collected, sold on, and then they were left with these mountains of red, that kind of reddy rock. But what I discovered was when I was cutting it, there was still a lot of oil left in it. So it was very sort of like wasteful as well. Like they hadn't really, like they did it on such an industrial scale that there was a lot of the shale oil left in, but it was all like heaped now on these sort of waste piles. But on the flip side of that now, they've all been turned into like protected nature reserves. So as well as telling stories of, I guess, extraction and exploitation, I wanted to try and tell like the positive stories as well. So like it comes with a little kind of like booklet that sort of goes into that in more detail. And some of the other interesting ones as part of that collection are pieces that were extracted from the North Sea, so from 5,000 foot below the seabed, so rock that you would never imagine to see, or like never be able to see. And these were from it's a small charity that are diverting all these, I guess, cores from landfill. They're called North Sea Core, and they're trying to redistribute them for research purposes because they were all housed before in all these, I guess, like warehouses. But because oil and gas industry, they've stopped sort of commissioning the fields that they belong to. They don't need them more for research, so they were just getting sent to landfill, which is so wasteful because it would have cost like millions of pounds to extract. So my work sort of was at that point, and then
it's a big leap.
So I was then thinking like Susanna did the open call for Earth Matters, and then I was sort of thinking like, how could I bring my knowledge and interest and translate ideas about soil? But we had a meeting at the Hunterian with the drawings, and they were really interesting to see the cross sections. And I started thinking like the live elements of soil, and it's so related to kind of rocks and mineralogy. So it got me thinking in a different way. And we also did a trip to the James Hutton Soil Institute as a group of artists and researchers with Susanna. And the thing that came out of it for me was that I discovered that the urban soils are some of the most fertile soils in Scotland. And then there are these maps that they've created at the Hutton Institute that kind of show all the different sort of uses for soil. And I was just sort of thinking, well, actually it does make sense because early settlers would have settled in places they could have grown their food or other materials for other things. And so actually as like settlements turned into towns into cities, of course. And so a lot of the land surrounding these cities is very fertile as well. So for the work, this is my work. Again, you see this nice blue colour. That's one of the 50 shades of Scottish soil. And then, so my piece is sort of, a smaller sculpture. And again, it's all about sort of like looking in and seeing what the materials are. So I took some samples of soil from my garden.
So this is Glasgow tenement soil.
Glasgow tenements, right, city centre, to sort of see and to try and prove that theory of how fertile the soil was. So I worked with Godfrey Fitton of Edinburgh Uni. And he helped me sort of analyse, and we did X-ray diffraction tests to see what the mineralogy were, and that influenced the mineral structures that I kind of faceted and carved that you see at the far
So how many
left.
what because you've got nematodes, you've got lichen, so you've made these like little amulets as well, again, which I think is a very interesting reference to the idea when we used to have amulets to protect the earth and our crops. So yes, you decided to take this and then craft enlarged through a microscope. Maybe just go quickly onto the next image. Yes.
So I did a lot of research into what the materiality of the soil was, and went and, as I said, I'd worked with Godfrey, but it was more sort of like the geological side, and I was interested in trying to work out what the live side would be, and so went to Ascus with Kira and Sanika, and they really helped me look at all the different elements of the soil. So I managed to capture all these images of the kind of the biodiversity within it, which there's some live little creatures. This one was curling up and unfurling. He was a rotifer, which I'd never heard of before. Nematodes were these little kind of wormy creatures that kind of unfurled and opened. And you can see I've tried to recreate that, and using a lot of sort of jewellery materials to make them more, I guess, like like the amulets, so that they were more kind of prized, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the idea that kind of treasure the kind of buried treasure that we often take for granted.
So we take, and those things are often, we can't see because they're so small, the scale of it. And so part of the research was to figure out what these elements did. And so working what the sort of scale is for these pieces with the kind of purposes, I created these sort of descriptive charms in a way, which I think is leaning more into maybe not necessarily like scientific, but also just thinking like how, as people as well, we need these other things to protect us too. And I think with this work, I was really interested in kind of the rights of nature movement. I don't know if anyone's come across that, where it's like trying to advocate for different parts of nature, like different rivers that don't necessarily have a voice, but they're being changed. And so I wanted work to advocate for that, just sort of like James Hutton was trying to, like all those years ago, advocate for soil and the different things that were the unknown.
Because I've got to mention the elements of agriculture, which Hutton, it was his work a treatise that he was working on throughout his life, but he had failing eyesight, and so he dictated it to his sister, Isabella Hutton. And we've got that on show again at the Botanics, and so it's never published. But in that, he just talks a lot about soil and understanding of how important it is to cherish, and about weather conditions and crop rotation. So that's something we really wanted to pick up in the exhibition, and how we need to kind of value and understand soil degradation. So that's where Stefanie's work kind of literally puts the soil on a beautiful Petri dish.
And I guess like working with the scientists to really understand how nutrient the soil was. And, looking at that image, you could see there was so much, there was hundreds of photos that I could have chosen from to show, but there was just so much life in it, and that you don't see. But I'll never, like when you've got dirt under your fingernails, it's like thinking differently. But this was a nice image that I just seen for the first time today, actually, that Susanna, when did you take that?
Saturday. I was down and there was a little girl looking, because they give out microscopes. So yes, there she was, gazing and enjoying.
So I think it's trying to do the purpose of what was intended by getting people to sort of look in and sort of appreciate the unseen of the work. So yeah.
Brilliant. I think now I'm just let's leave it there, because I think if there's any questions or comments or queries, please do put your hand up. Oh, there's one here. Hi, wait for the microphone, just so people online can hear you.
Hi, you cited flint in one of the zone samples that you used, and you've described walking various fields. Have either of you found any flint artifacts from Mesolithic, Neolithic era, and have you done anything with those flint artifacts?
Do you want to go first?
So it's not something I've spent a lot of time myself looking for. Normally when I come across flints, it's usually just actually on the beach, and most of it was brought over as ship ballasts during the Industrial Revolution, because we don't have any sort of big local sources of flint in Scotland. But yeah, it's not something that I've spent a lot of time, but I do, I have a friend who does a lot of flint napping and tries to learn those kind of skills. But yeah, I don't know if you've ever been.
I need to find out who that is. I want to learn flint napping. So I did a little bit of research maybe about 2 years ago when I was bringing that collection together, and thinking about how flint actually is very hard material, so you can carve into it. As a jeweler, like a lot of these other stones that I find are fairly soft, so you're kind of limited to what you could do. So I was interested in trying to maybe learn to facet with flint. But I did discover there is an area in Aberdeenshire where there's these flint mines from about 11,000 years ago. And I took me and the children, come on, let's go on this fun walk. And so there's like remnants of these sort of hollows in the landscape. They're filled with grass now and things, but they there was a lot of like flint shards. I hadn't found any tools, but there was a lot of like the kind of, I guess when you're flint napping, there's so much that gets kind of taken away from the material. So there was elements of that there in that site. I can't remember what the name is, but it is in Aberdeenshire. But if you look up, like, I think it's like the only sort of found sort of concentrated mine in Scotland, but it's just a country walk that you can go on.
Thank you, very interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm also going to encourage our online viewers to post any questions. I was really struck when you were speaking. There was a sort of strong theme of kind of childhood and kind of regression almost, kind of, and it made, Stefanie, your work was making me think about my childhood grubbing around in the mud as well. Do you think that is kind of an important part of Hutton's formation? Is there something kind of like quite elemental or childhood things that he encountered in his childhood that he developed through his kind of research?
I mean, I think very much so, because again, as a child, and I actually picked up 2 worms today. I want to go up Carlton Hill, and of course it's been raining and they were along the path, so I thought, come on, because again, Hutton talks a lot about worms and obviously foreshadowing, and Darwin about the importance of worms and kind of aeration and movement. They're kind of the soil's kind of engineers. So I do think by looking at the ground beneath our feet, and I think, and it was interesting at Ilana Halperin's exhibition where she's been looking at Mars and how all that kind of money is going to, to explore Mars, and actually what is beneath us is little explored. Do you find that, Katie, that actually there's more, being that we talk about Hutton being the father of modern geology, do you feel that we're spending enough understanding and appreciating enough what's beneath us?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, because with geology as a subject and the way it's taught, a lot of the time, geologists are trained to go into these extractive industries. And although we don't do much of that here, a lot of that is concentrated elsewhere, particularly the global south. And there is quite a disconnect between that kind of what geologists kind of do and, the sort of reasoning for studying it. And yeah, what was the next part of that question?
Yeah, just whether we should be kind of talking about deep future as well as deep time, that maybe we should be more appreciative.
Definitely, because I have found that when you, as a geologist, going out and speaking to people, a lot of the time people either, they just kind of switch off because they're like, it's a rock. Why you've just spent 2 hours talking about one rock, But when you're looking at these rocks and what they've told us about the past, you can use that to help us look at the future and about understanding, all the kind of stuff we have done in this part of Scotland, because of the coal industry, we actually do know a lot about the rocks underneath our feet, because when there is like that economic value, the governments will spend a lot of money to actually see how much money they could make out of it. But yeah, I think it is really important that for geology, we don't just focus on the past. It is about that future, because if, depending on what happens and what humans end up doing to the planet, there could be hundreds more millions of years into the future, that I really think that by looking at the geology in that context is really important. And yeah, we need to encourage that future generation of geologists.
And what I've learned by working on this exhibition and speaking to people like you, there's a lot of geology in Scotland. I mean, that's what, and you think about Hutton, you can kind of get out of bed in this city and look at the crags. You can go look at Carlton Hill. You can look across the Berwick Law. I mean, there's a lot of geology happening. Is that when you think that for a small country, there's coastal, there's flatlands, there's flow country, there's a lot of, is Scotland still attracting keen geologists because of its landscape?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, a lot of even sort of non-geologists, tourists come to Scotland quite often. It's for the landscape, which is fundamentally dictated by the geology. So even if people don't realise it, they are kind of being drawn by that underlying geology. And yeah, the sort of geology of Scotland is incredibly complex, but that is part of what makes it so interesting and so variable for like a country of its size. And yeah, we are very fortunate, because I mean, there's some places in the world that you can drive for hours and hours and just see the same type of rock. Whereas, you can drive an hour in Scotland and pass over 500 million years, which is just incredible. So, and it's that kind of sense of like the 4 dimensions of, thinking about time and space as well. And yeah, I think we are very lucky to be.
And that's
Scotland.
what you've found, Stefanie, as well, that you're kind of hunter-gatherer of materials. That's very much the growing up. And you grew up in Fife, and can you remember a child kind of messing around in
Yeah, because along the east nook of Fife, you've got the rubies at Ely. You would look for, and then you've got it's really fossil rich along there. Like my favourite beach is Ravenscraig, which is like a stone's throw. Can I say that? Yeah. A stone's throw from where I was born, actually, in Fife, and the sandstone outcrops there are so stunningly beautiful. It looks like you're on a planet, like another planet. Yeah. So yeah, I think having that material there, but what I've been interested in, and it sort of maybe speaks a little bit about like sort of past/future, is like I'm looking into the way. So I also do a little bit of curation, and I'm looking into the way how I guess land has shaped culture, or making culture specifically, through sort of the geological materials that there, but also the how it allows certain plants or plant material to grow and thrive. So looking at sort of specifically in Fife, but the histories of sort of, you were mentioning like coal carving, but looking at linoleum as well from like different materials that have been kind of made and collected there. The linen industry as well, where they've been able to grow flax and then mill it down and create our textiles. So a lot of the geology informs then how we as people have influenced and created and made with different materials. But it all started as rocks, which is like another.
Yeah, quick question. It's probably quite a complicated one, but can you say a few words about the connections between Hutton and Darwin? Because it feels like Darwin probably couldn't have done what he did without Hutton's ideas.
Is that a Katie question?
I'm not an expert.
I have my.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm not an expert in that sort of particular area, but yeah, I think that without that understanding of like geological evolution and the evolution of deep time and how deep time, the Earth basically evolved, Darwin wouldn't have been able to have that kind of context or understanding of like the time scales needed for evolution. So I'm pretty sure that at that time, a lot of the people and their ideas would have flowed between people.
And obviously Darwin studied at Edinburgh University. Yeah. So, it was just kind of literally decades. So I'm sure it was in the air. And I also think I'm always very interested. I think Darwin was a writer. He had a very good wife, and I think his ideas were disseminated even at the time much more effectively and efficiently than Hutton's. And I think Hutton never married. He had an illegitimate child. And I think it's quite interesting how he didn't live in a big house like Clark of Eldin. So things were kept. You didn't have to move house. And I think a lot of Hutton's writings were lost, and there's that whole still a controversy really about where Hutton's papers and mineral collection went. I mean, what do you say, Katie? Because were kind of gifted to the Society of Antiquaries.
Yeah, and there's a few different sort of theories about what actually happened to them and who was responsible for them going missing. But yeah, they've not turned up in a collection anywhere. I mean, it doesn't mean that they're not, but from the kind of different evidence, it looks like the sort of Royal Society were keeping a hold of them until that they were able to pass them to the museum, but they didn't think the curator at the time would have actually looked after them properly because he was opposed to Hutton's theories. So they were kind of rivals at the time. And that's really interesting because I guess it's something that people will think about even today when they're donating specimens to an institution is, are they going to be used? What will they be used for? And in a way, I find it like, it'd be nice to have his collection, but not having it is actually quite useful as a discussion point and thinking about those things as well. And also there's that, chance that one day you might stumble across some of that material. It could have been that it's all just been completely separated, and the way documentation historically was done in different institutions has caused,
And also Charles Lyell. I think Charles Lyell, again, another Scottish geologist, was hugely influenced by Hutton, and his collection has been kept and was recently gifted or acquired by the University of Edinburgh. So once you have a collection, I always think then you have the PhD student, then you have the mini-series, then you have the blockbuster, which there's never quite, and hoping Earth Matters is the kind of mini blockbuster. But sorry, there's another
We've
question.
got time for one more question.
Hello, I've realised I've got a tame geologist here. My son has just moved to the Slate Islands in Eastdale, and I wondered, is it relevant to talk about slate and how that happened?
Yeah, I mean, the sort of slate industry in Scotland was huge at one point, and so was the building stone industry. And there's been a lot of work in recent years trying to look at the potential of opening back up these industries, particularly on a local scale, so that local communities and local people are able to get those skills and bring work into the area. But there is also, because of the context of today and a climate crisis and things, there's a lot of people who are opposed to going back into that kind of extractive industry. But then there is an argument that if you're not bringing your slate locally and you're shipping it from elsewhere. We bring a lot of slate from Spain at the moment. It's quite a big source for Spain. What is the carbon footprint of that? And yeah, but geologically, the slates in Scotland are beautiful. They're metamorphic and they kind of occur in very specific areas, and certain slates like Ballachulish slate usually has quite big, nice pyrite crystals. And talking about like people and their understanding of materials is something that I'm really interested in. I think it's missing a lot from geology is that social history and about how people who lived within those landscapes were familiar with what was around them and how to work it and develop those techniques. And now, because we're kind of so global and capitalist, that's just, people don't really do that anymore. They're not as in touch with what's around them. And I think that's something that's really missing. And to be able to tell those stories from the past, hopefully will inspire people in the future to think about that and look after what's around them.
Great. Well, I'm really sorry. We're come to time. We had a little bit longer today, and I feel like we could continue for longer, but I'm afraid that's where we're finishing today. So please thank me again. Please thank our panel. Please join me in thanking our panel, Susanna, Katie, and Stefanie.
I was just thinking about another exhibition, Extraction, which is at Jupiter Artland, and it includes John Lathan and his work on the Five Sisters Bings. So if you're talking more about shale, so get to Jupiter if you can this summer for that exhibition. Thank you. Thank you. Many thanks for listening. I do hope you enjoyed our conversation. And please do catch up with our numerous other conversations, ranging from talking about the clothes of Bernard Klein, to the art of Wilhelmina Barnes-Graham, to the work of Donald Locke. Big thanks as ever to Ryan Scott Media and Malin Lewis for the music. Subscribe, rate and rave. Many thanks. And I do hope you can join us again.